This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Well, thank you again, Robin, for doing this interview with ZeroNow. We really appreciate it. I want to start with how you got into the subject of campus safety, why this is something that is important to you.
Well, I started out in security journalism anyway, writing for a sister publication, Security Sales and Integration. And then the publishing company that I worked for bought Campus Safety magazine, and they said, "Hey, will you run it?" And I said, "Okay." And actually, it's just such a fascinating topic. It can be very tragic too, but the fact that everybody goes to school, almost everybody in there has ever been in the United States has been in a hospital. So I mean, it really applies to so many different people and so many different aspects of people's lives. So and also just being a human being and having been on the receiving end of some, unacceptable behavior as far as sexual assaults and things like that, it's something that is touches me very close. It's close to my heart.
Mm-hmm. So, as the editor-in-chief of Campus Safety magazine, I imagine you are responsible for much of the articles and podcasts and other things that you guys are curating. What has been your focus thus far? What have been some of the topics that you guys have really honed in on?
Our focus is really, first of all, Campus Safety magazine is a trade publication for folks, practitioners who are in law enforcement, security, emergency management, technology, that for schools, universities, and hospitals. So we really focus on the practitioner side of things, how to actually get things done to make campuses safer. So, and truth be told, when we talk about focus, you really have to take a really broad approach to campus safety and security, because if you're just focusing on one thing, you're probably missing something. If you're focusing on something on the right, you're probably missing something over on the left. So it's really about an all hazards approach, and so that includes mental health, emergency management, security technology, hazing, sexual assault, bullying, drug and intervention. Did I mention mental health already? That's a big component, and all those things, and many more. So, and then lawsuits, regulations, compliance with those kinds of regulations and laws.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is where the work that you're doing at Campus Safety magazine and the work that ZeroNow is doing has a particular synergy, because the work that ZeroNow is trying to do also wants to take a very holistic approach to examining campus safety and gun violence. So, as you have a lot of experience and knowledge in the journalism side of things, I want to talk about what exactly you think the role of journalism is when it comes to improving campus safety.
Well, I really think that it's important to focus on facts. I mean, as far as being in the role as a journalist of campus safety, we can be so easily pulled into the culture wars, and it's really important to focus on what's real rather than what is, some hot topic. Granted, sometimes the culture wars actually cause security or safety incidents, so obviously we have to address those issues. But it's really about taking a level-headed approach, looking at the facts, looking at both sides, and also really evaluating the sources to make sure that they're legitimate and that they're talking about real issues. And also, when it comes to focus, to not only talk about gun violence. I mean, gun violence is terrible and everything like that, but really when it comes right down to it, a college student is much more likely to be sexually assaulted, or maybe be a victim of hazing, or maybe have a mental health issue than they are to be a victim of gun violence. So really looking at that reality and make sure that we're addressing those issues and the real exposures that are there, as well as covering gun violence, because it's such a huge issue and everybody's so concerned about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what's really interesting about what you said is the the desire to focus on facts, and that brings me to the role of emotion in journalism. And it sort of becomes this balancing act where if you use too much emotion, people stop considering the veracity of what is being said. But then if you don't use any emotion at all, then it becomes something where maybe it's harder to build an audience. So, how do you understand the role of emotion in reporting on something that is very emotional? Obviously, campus safety, the safety of our children, is an emotional subject. So, how do you manage how the role emotion plays in your journalism?
It's really a balance. And fortunately, I have a wonderful senior editor, Amy Rock. I want to give her a shout out. A lot of times, if there's something I'm covering that maybe is too close to home for me, I'll run it by her. But I really try and use my emotion and really have it as a balance, because if you use too much, like you said, it first of all, my lizard brain takes over, and the fear takes over, and if I'm just solely relying on facts, you know, it's hard to attract people and get people's attention. But it also, you have to tap into some emotion, because without that, you're losing touch with humanity. And if there's nothing else that we have to deal with at campus safety, is the fact that we're dealing with people's lives. And as a practitioner, whether it's a campus police chief or security director or emergency management, they really have to acknowledge the fact that whatever they're doing will touch on people's emotions. And so we really try and recognize that fact as well.
Hmm. Do you believe that the mainstream media has become overly infused with emotion today?
Some have, and I know that a lot of times they report on these things to an excessive amount. I've got to say, a lot of mainstream media, though, I think has become a lot more responsible as far as not glamorizing the folks who commit active shooter attacks. That was not always the case, but
Hmm.
people have really um, talked. People in that space have really talked to journalists and say, hey, what you're doing might actually be making active shooter incidents more prevalent rather than less prevalent. I mean, obviously, we have a responsibility to report on those, but to what extent and how you do it. And I do think the mainstream media is really becoming a lot more responsible about that. Now, when it comes to social media and people, there are a lot of citizen journalists out there, and you have the Alex Joneses of the world who are reporting on Sandy Hook, and he's repeating a lot of things that just aren't true. And so, you have folks like that, and you know they're not legitimate journalists. They're not mainstream journalists. And another thing to think about too is I really got to hand it to a lot of mainstream journalists who are much more sensitively reporting on suicide, because there are suicide prevention experts who have actually reached out to mainstream media to say, hey, this is the way to report on suicides. This is how not to report on suicide. So I think in a lot of ways, mainstream media has become a lot more responsible than they were in the past, but
Hmm.
they still could improve.
Going off of that point, as you know, trust in mainstream media has reached pretty low levels. As the editor in chief of Campus Safety Magazine, what are some ways or what are some steps that you've taken to make sure that people trust the information that you guys are putting out?
Well, I think we tend to cover both sides of the story, within reason. I mean, there's some things like, you know, the people who say Parkland didn't happen or Sandy Hook didn't happen. We're not going to dignify that with coverage, because it's just we've basically covered that because um, those have actually created security issues for campuses. But we don't cover those opinions because they're just not legitimate. But we really try and focus on both sides. We try to be reasonable, but at the same time, we have to remember that as Campus Safety Magazine, we are a trade publication now, and we have to look at who our readers are. Our readers are primarily security practitioners, law enforcement, emergency managers. So, we do tend to skew towards that direction. But at the same time, too, a lot of our readers are also mental health professionals and teachers and counselors, and they tend to skew a little bit more that way. So we really try and cover both aspects. But I think to your viewers out there, I mean, folks have to realize we are a trade publication. We do have a primary audience that we serve, and I think with any publication, you have to know who your primary audience is, and no matter what publication you're with, they're going to address that audience in a particular way, and we do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, what
just want to be fully transparent with you on that,
Right, yeah, and I think that is really interesting, and what has been so interesting for me doing these interviews for ZeroNow has been the diverse perspectives of so many different people who study campus safety. It is not a monolith. There are so many different ideas, so many different perspectives that range, from different sides of the political spectrum, from different sides of all sorts of spectrums, age, socioeconomic status, demographics. And so I think that you're in this really unique position where it's like, yes, you know who your readers are, but your readers, within that, your group of readers, there are so many different thoughts and opinions and ways of looking at a subject, which means that, you guys get to report on things from all different angles. So,
well, and also, I'll just to chime in there, one thing that I've really learned with covering this space is that it's really important to keep an open mind, because every time like something happens and I think I know the way it happened or the way it's going to go, I wind up being surprised. Literally keeping an open mind is super important, because crimes, and every time there's a crime, something new happens. I mean, whoever thought back in 2001 that folks would hijack a plane and actually fly them into a building? I mean, that was just a paradigm shift, and so we always have to be ready to be ready for that another paradigm shift in the way crime is being committed, and also in the ways that we're addressing crime and safety incidents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think that's a majorly important part of journalism, just being ready to take on whatever happens, and especially in the field of campus safety and gun violence, it is an ever-changing landscape. How have you noticed how political polarization and partisanship has influenced your ability to report on campus safety and gun violence, if at all?
Well, I try and keep my political points of view out of my coverage.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have folks, again, going back to Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook truthers and the Parkland truthers or whatever, like that, you get people who just they can influence what we're doing and stuff like that. So it is challenging. I really just kind of use my gut and try and let the facts fall where they may, regardless of whether or not they make one side or the other side look good or bad or indifferent or whatever. It's my job to cover the facts rather than just, spew my own, particular point of view or attach myself to one side or the other. And, a lot of times that makes me kind of unpopular because, when I say one thing on one side, I'll get a bunch of heat from them. And then if I say something on the other side, that's equally true. I get it from that side as well. So you got to have kind of a thick skin, and, they're entitled to their opinion, but we cover it the way we see it. And, sometimes we get it wrong, but I think most of the time we try and get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, we always try and get it right, but sometimes we don't get it right.
Right, yeah, exactly. And, I think that's great, just resisting a tribalist mindset and pursuing the truth, because that, when it comes to something like campus safety and advocating for, the betterment of safety for our children and kids in schools, I don't think that there is much time for, political games. So that's really great to hear. I want to talk about how you built the audience that you have, because that's something that I think a lot of people are interested about. Certainly we are here at ZeroNow, just building a community of different people who are interested in the work we are doing.
Well, it helps that we've been around since the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And, we really just try and post a lot of stuff that people want to read, and we really try and keep everything up to date. And fortunately, we have a huge library of things that we've been posting since 2006 when we launched our website. And a lot of that stuff is what we call evergreen in the media industry, where it's just basically, okay, when you talk about how to detect a weapon, a concealed weapon, well, that really doesn't change 15, 17 years that I've been in this space. And so it's really just trying to focus on putting out good quality content and making sure that it's up to date, and try and reach as many people as possible, get as many people to write for us as possible who have different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific goals in mind with what you want the next chapter of Campus Safety Magazine to look like?
I would love for our society as a whole, to become less polarized as far as everything is concerned, but particularly as far as school safety and security is concerned. And I see a lot of folks really, how do I say it? I'm seeing a lot of cancel culture that is making it very difficult for folks in school and university security spaces to commit to decisions and make decisions that they'll stand by, because you make one wrong move and you're out, or someone's, or even if you may have done 99.9% of what you did was correct, but this 0.1% was a mistake. When there's something like an active shooter or a sexual assault or a suicide, or there's so many things that can go wrong, and especially with so many new things going on, that I think so many of our audience is not willing to give folks the benefit of the doubt, and maybe do away with cancel culture a bit, or at least put it on the back burner a little bit, and give our readers who are practitioners some benefit of the doubt so they can actually do their jobs. Because I really see cancel culture as making a lot of folks in law enforcement, security, emergency management afraid to join the profession, because they're afraid that any wrong step they make, they're going to be fired.
Yeah, that's definitely a major fear. And I guess it begs the question, of course. Journalism is the way that we sort of disseminate information to society. So I think journalism has a major role to play in taking that temperature down, and I think probably the first place to start is sticking with the facts, and then also acknowledging when you make a mistake, and also acknowledging the validity in different viewpoints that are sometimes contradictory or sometimes conflict. It doesn't necessarily mean as one is inherently evil and one is inherently the objectively correct one.
Well, and also what I find too is, you've got mental health people who think that a lot of times the sole solution is mental health, or if you've got law enforcement and say the sole solution is, more police in schools or on campus, and you've got the technology people saying, you've got to have cameras and access control and emergency management and blah blah blah, and really it's a combination of all three and everybody working together. And I really see this tribalism as making that their ability to work together. They're not able to do that because of that tribalism and the fear of cancel culture.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears a little bit to the investigative process for you and your staff as journalists. What is the process for sourcing information, vetting information, finding a story that you want to pitch? I just want you to sort of walk us through what that looks like for when reporting on campus safety.
Well, truth be told, Campus Safety Magazine, there's me and my senior editor, and that's it. And,
wow.
There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of security incidents that happen at schools, universities, and hospitals every day. So we can't possibly cover everything. And really, when it comes right down to it, as far as incidents are concerned, we rely on traditional media because they have, Associated Press, CNN, Fox News, NBC, ABC, CBS, USA Today. They all have way more resources than we do, as well as the local media. So a lot of times we pull from them. I tend to pull from many different sources to make sure that we're getting as much correct information as possible. So where we really try and focus on is to look at the leading practices once more information is known about these incidents. And then we talk to various experts in the field. And quite honestly, I've done a lot of this, so I can kind of recognize a lot of things that maybe were missed or maybe aren't being covered or whatever, or leading practices that we need to talk about. And so we tend to focus more on the aftermath and the lessons learned from things rather than actual incidents, because we just don't have the resources to cover the incidents as they happen.
Yeah, and you know what? The big news organizations can deal with that. And then I think where you guys come in and what makes you unique is that you're able to sort of, after everything has simmered down and all of the discourse has simmered down, you could sort of look at it and say, okay, well, what can we learn from this? What can we take from this to actually make a substantive difference?
Well, and also when you think about it, the general media, like the CNNs and the ABCs and Fox News, is 2 or 3 weeks after an incident happens, they're on to the next thing. Whereas we can really, pay attention to an after action report that might come out a year later or 2 years later, or maybe, there's another development that happened, 3 years, and then we can refer back to something we covered 3 years ago and tie that all in together, which a lot of traditional news media can't. And so we really try and take the long view of things more than the, instant gratification.
So finally, I want to talk a little bit about what's next for your publication, where you see you guys going and what you hope to accomplish in the future.
I really hope that we can address the cancel culture, particularly for security and law enforcement practitioners and technology practitioners. That's really my goal. And really, our goal is to pull in a lot more mental health professionals, counselors, social workers, teachers, faculty members, administrators, and really get us to be a cohesive group that we can work together to address things in a way so things don't fall through the cracks, or when they do, we have a healthy way of addressing it rather than a cutthroat way of doing that.
Well, I think that is a really great mission, and I love the work that you guys are doing, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with me.
Thanks, Michael. It's been a pleasure.